It's a chilly, drizzly winter Atlanta morning, and 35-year-old Lita McClinton is suddenly awakened.
It's around 8:15 in the morning, and she heard the doorbell ring. And she tightens up her rope and goes downstairs to open the door.
And I think she was probably not going to open it, but she looked through the keyhole and saw that the person had a box of flowers.
There was a man standing at the door holding a long white box of long stem roses that had a big, thick pink ribbon around it.
So she receives the flowers, thinking that this is a delivery.
She was really excited. She thought that it was a gift from one of her friends.
In a sea of red brick townhouses, Lita's white one stands out. Her best friend Poppy and 3-year-old daughter have spent the night, and they are still in bed upstairs, just waking up.
Poppy hears her say, "Good morning," to the man at the door.
The flower delivery man produces a handgun. He fires a shot.
She actually put the box of roses in front of her face. The second shot went right through the center of her head, and she fell with a large thud.
Lita's friend Poppy was upstairs with her toddler, and right away she grabbed her daughter and hid her into a closet and said, "You gotta be quiet, quiet as a mouse." She didn't know if the gunman was gonna come for her. Lita's neighbor hears the shots, then sees the guy running like a bat out of hell, just booking it out of the complex, and he calls 911.
The first police officer is only a few blocks away, and he gets the call, and so that police officer ends up holding Lita's hand. They thought Lita was completely unconscious, and yet she managed to squeeze his hand as he kept comforting her and telling her everything was going to be okay. And he said it was her comforting him. Poppy got out of the closet and called Lita's mother, and she couldn't get words out, and she finally just said, "Lita's been shot." Lita's mother called her husband. When they went to the hospital, they were put in a separate little waiting room. The doctor tended to Lita, and he came out about 30 minutes later and said, "I'm sorry."
Never get easier because she's gone. We should have gone first, not her.
Atlanta's exclusive Buckhead neighborhood is known for its sprawling mansions, not murder. So when the shooting happened right here, neighbors were shocked and on edge.
Sullivan was found in the doorway of her townhouse, shot twice in the head.
It's pretty surprising that in this area, those kinds of things probably wouldn't happen.
How did you learn that Lita had been killed?
I ran to the TV because I heard Sullivan on Slayton Drive.
Police say a box of roses was found near her body. The gunman apparently posed as a delivery man.
And I said, "Oh my God, that's Lita."
Detectives on the scene found a bullet fragment, 2 shell casings, and the box of roses.
2 gunshots from a 9mm penetrated the box. The weapon was never found. To this day, it's never been found.
In this case, you had just a minor amount of evidence.
At the time, it was the top story on the news. And law enforcement officers felt a great deal of pressure in order to bring Lita's killer to justice.
For years, Lita's case was cold, buried underneath the weight of unanswered questions and fading memories.
I'm Deb Miller-Landau, and I just wrote a book called A Devil Went Down to Georgia about the murder of Lita McClinton Sullivan. I covered this story for Atlanta Magazine back in 2004, and the more people I talked to, the more that I researched, the more I felt like I began to know Lita. So talking about the day that she died feels personal.
The case was also personal to Clint Rucker, the prosecutor. When I came to Atlanta to meet up with him, I learned that one of his passions is puzzles, working from the outside in, which also translates to solving homicides. Where do you begin? How do you start to connect?
When I'm putting together a puzzle, not only in real life, but also a murder case, I make an assessment about what it is I'm working with. I start to identify pieces of the puzzle that are foundational.
Lita's murder case looks like a true crime story, but it goes a lot deeper. It's a story about love and loss and greed.
Lita had been reared in Atlanta's Black Elite.
You know, on the surface, she was living an Atlanta dream.
A prosperous upbringing.
A very prosperous upbringing. The expectations for her life were pretty high.
Black women have had to be exceptional in order to be seen. And that was the case then, and I think it's still the case now.
One thing seems certain, a murder of this kind is personal.
Was there a feeling that this had to be pretty calculated?
Police knew almost immediately Lita Sullivan was the intended victim.
Who would kill this woman? She wasn't robbed. Somebody came to the door with roses and shot her dead.
Fair share of crime, but this was most certainly one of the highest profile cases that got reported in the news.
Sullivan was shot twice in the head. A box of roses found next to her body.
Using a flower delivery man and shooting her, it was something that just kind of stuck out to me.
Atlanta, Georgia, billed as a vibrant melting pot, a destination for creatives. But if you grew up in Georgia in the 1970s, as I did, you know this was a very different place then. One still emerging from the dark shadows of segregation and racial tensions. What was 1970s Atlanta like when she was sort of coming along?
We've got African Americans that are kind of ascending into really prominent positions. Lita also is ascending because her parents are part of this movement.
Lita's parents, Emory and Joanne McClinton, were both power players, movers and shakers in Atlanta.
Emory McClinton was on the State Board of Transportation. Joanne McClinton was a member of the Georgia legislature.
Joanne will tell you stories about being in really interpersonal meetings with Dr. King.
She was Maynard Jackson's campaign manager when he ran for mayor.
I think the McClintons had high expectations for who Lita would become. Lita Sullivan was a true daughter of Atlanta.
She was just a gem, very, very proper.
And she had grown up in a world of cotillions, so she really was sort of that classic upper crust black person growing up in Atlanta.
She knew where she was going.
She had a great sense of style.
And absolutely charming.
After high school, she went on to Spelman College. Her parents sort of hoped that she would enter the political arena like they were, but she was very much into fashion. She was working at a boutique at Lenox Square, and in walks this guy who had unruly curls and weird glasses and just immediately saw Lita and was taken with her.
Fresh out of college, 24-year-old Lita is smitten with James, Jim Sullivan. He's a bit older, 35, and he's also white.
He showered her with gifts. He just completely showered her with attention.
He comes in, he dazzles her. What did you learn about him?
I learned that what he saw was a fantasy in Lita. I think he looked at her as a young, very attractive, very smart African-American female.
Another big difference between them is class. Lita has been raised in Atlanta's high society and Jim on Boston's gritty South Side.
He grew up in a very middle to lower middle class environment.
He went to Holy Cross College, got a bachelor's degree in economics.
He always wanted more for himself. He always wanted to be a rich person, but it didn't seem like that was in the cards. He was an accountant. He was working hard, but he really wasn't getting ahead.
But life is about to change for Jim Sullivan when he inherits a thriving liquor distributorship from his uncle, worth millions of dollars.
Crown Beverages was worth around $3.2 million. Jim had become a wealthy man. So when the McClintons met Jim for the first time, they were like, who is this guy? He had this kind of manner that was very uncouth and brash, and they were sort of mystified about what their daughter saw in him. I mean, I think the only thing they had in common was that he was Catholic and they were Catholic as well. But everything else was complete polar opposites.
Another concern, of course, was race. Remember, this is the 70s. Even though the country is watching color barriers slipping away on the hit show The Jeffersons, with Primetime's first interracial couple.
Your parents have never gotten over the fact that I'm white.
That's because you never got over being white.
At that time, this was unusual.
Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws that forbade blacks and whites to marry had only been repealed 10 years earlier.
Still, despite their obvious differences, Jim Sullivan pops the question to Lita.
So the McClintons were like, you cannot marry this man.
They felt like Lita was really making a mistake and was kind of caught up in the exuberance of this relationship.
Despite her parents' strong objections, Lita and Jim are engaged. But on the eve of her wedding, Jim drops a bomb.
He tells Lita that he has been married before and that he has 4 children. Lita was shocked.
And then, the very same night, Jim Sullivan blindsides his bride-to-be again.
He whips out a piece of paper and he says, can you sign this? And then she looks down and sees that he's drawn up a prenuptial agreement. And she's like, what is this?
Apparently determined to protect his newfound wealth, Sullivan surprises Lita with a prenup, which says that in the event of a divorce, she would walk away with virtually nothing. She's reluctant, but the cake is ordered, the flowers are ready, so Lita signs the agreement and ties the knot anyway.
Lita got married in 1976. It was a small ceremony in Macon, Georgia. Joanne McClinton would later describe that as the worst day of her life.
The newlyweds settle some 80 miles south of Atlanta near Jim's business in Macon. It's a world away from Atlanta. But Lita agrees to give up her current job and her income and become full-time Mrs. Jim Sullivan.
They bought a house in Shirley Hills, a very affluent, very white part of Macon. Joanne and Emery McClinton feared for their daughter. Being part of an interracial couple in Macon, Georgia in the 1970s would have been extraordinarily challenging. The neighbors were like, you have the gall to bring a black wife to Shirley Hills. People threw garbage on their doorstep.
The out-and-out racism had to be tough for Lita. But she moves forward and makes some new connections and friends, including Yvette Miller.
When Lita and Yvette occasionally go out to eat, she notices something a bit curious.
We'd go out to lunch at a nice restaurant, and she couldn't pay the bill. And I would end up picking up the check.
And They were a wealthy couple.
They were very wealthy.
Then one Christmas season, a card arrives in the mail addressed to Jim. Lita opens it, and what she discovers will make her question every marriage seemed to be going well.
They were both intelligent, both attractive, definitely upper class, high society.
But just beneath the surface, there's some obvious cracks.
They seemed to be loving at first.
At first?
He was not that nice to her, and he was not that kind to her.
Was he brusque? Was he brash?
He was a bit arrogant. Even though he had all of these resources, he did not, in my opinion, take care of his wife.
Friends say that the once generous millionaire has suddenly become a miser.
He was notoriously cheap.
He would wear his dead uncle's clothes around the house. He would use the sheath from the dry cleaning as saran wrap in the kitchen. He didn't want Lita to work, but he kept her on a very tight allowance where he gave her $150 a week.
Did she express any discontentment with her marriage?
When we were at those restaurants, Jim just does not give me enough money to take care of me and the house. You know, she clearly was not happy.
Was there talk of infidelity?
Lita had several instances where she questioned whether or not her husband was actually having an affair.
One day she finds a long blonde hair in their master bathroom, and she asks Jim about it, and he says, "I don't know what you're talking about." They got into this cycle of, she accused him of philandering. He would deny it, and then he would buy her sort of an expensive jewelry apology.
Then, during the holidays one year, Lita makes another stunning discovery.
A Christmas card came addressed to Jim. She opened it. A woman wrote in something like, missing your kisses. The woman's return address was on the envelope, so Lita went and spoke to her. And the woman said that she had been having an affair with Jim.
Lita is distraught and goes home to be with her parents in Atlanta. But her husband manages to lure her back, increasing her weekly allowance in a now post-nuptial agreement.
Now it's $300 instead of $150 a week, but it still shows that all of their assets belong to Jim.
That's right, the successful business, Lita's Mercedes, multiple properties, even her jewelry, still belong to her husband in the event of a divorce.
But in an attempt at reconciliation, Lita signs the postnup.
Just a few months after Lita signs that agreement, without Lita knowing, Sullivan decides to sell Crown Beverages for $5 million.
And that's not all. He tells her they're moving to Palm Beach, Florida.
Lita was in shock.
She had any clue that he was going to whistle her down to Palm Beach.
But Lita's new Florida home, located a stone's throw from what would become Mar-a-Lago, is more elaborate than she ever would have imagined. Called Casa Alita, it's a 17,000 square foot mansion with 8 oceanfront bedrooms.
It was just unbelievable.
When you went to Jim's home, you go through this tunnel and you would be at the beach. It's your own private beach.
But for Lita, everything that glitters isn't exactly gold.
James Sullivan very much wanted to integrate himself into the upper echelons of society, and his aspirations did not include Lita's participation.
It was not a welcoming place for a black woman to live. And when he found out that to sort of scale the level of social plateau he was looking at in Palm Beach, having a black wife was a serious impediment to that.
She was left out of some affairs, and she really became upset.
So even though they had money, this is a moneyed crowd, didn't really matter though.
He was barely rich. compared to Palm Beach.
Did he want to be in that crowd?
Oh, yes. He wanted to, be accepted as one of the rich and famous.
It doesn't take long before Jim starts to flirt with other women.
And it's at a cocktail party that one particularly elegant Palm Beach woman catches Sullivan's eye.
Jim sees Suki Rogers, who is a Korean-born socialite.
She was telegenic. She had a spicy personality. I think a man like Jim Sullivan could not help but be intrigued by this beautiful woman.
They started dating. He's still married to Lita.
By now, the Sullivans have been married nearly 10 years, but things are about to explode.
Lita finds women's lingerie in their master bed. It's the bra that broke the camel's back.
She said, I'm done. I'm packing up my stuff, and I'm going back home.
Lita arrives back in Atlanta. The very next day, she files for divorce from Jim.
But Sullivan fights Lita every step of the way, and the divorce drags on.
Did she seem concerned, worried, nervous about her breakup?
What I detected was she was excited, and she was cutting the cord and leaving Jim alone. She wanted her life back.
While Lita is looking forward to a new life of freedom, she can't be happy about the prospect of leaving her marriage with virtually nothing. No career, no Palm Beach mansion, no Buckhead townhouse, and $2,500 a month in alimony for 3 years. So Lita is going to divorce court, determined to fight for what she believes she deserves.
All she wanted was a reasonable financial settlement so that she could kind of go on with her life.
January 16th, 1987 was set up to be a pivotal day in the lives of Lita and Jim Sullivan.
A judge was going to decide whether or not to throw out the postnuptial agreement.
She might get as much as close to $1 million in cash and assets.
The morning of January 16th, Lita Sullivan, she'd lose her life that day in a murder.
With Lita out of the picture, Jim Sullivan stands to gain the property that they had and retain control over all his money.
Sullivan was the main suspect.
That is, until a treasure trove of secret recordings of Lita's private conversations are uncovered, taking this investigation in a whole new direction. And police are looking at you.
In it that's close to Lita, everybody's a suspect. But the first one would be the husband.
The first and obvious suspect was James Sullivan, who stood to gain everything from her death, all the property, all the monies, and who was contesting the divorce.
Detectives went down to speak to him in Palm Beach, and they put him through a polygraph.
Jim Sullivan not only passes the polygraph, but there's something else. He has an alibi that puts him nearly 700 miles away from the crime scene.
James Sullivan was actually in Palm Beach at the time of Lita's murder.
When you first look at it, it looks pretty cut and dry. When you interview all the people involved, everybody points in one direction, towards the husband. But when you sit down and look at the facts, I'm not so sure that the husband is the person that committed the crime.
Nothing surfaced in the early stages of the investigation that implicated Jim Sullivan in the murder.
Sullivan is cooperating with authorities, and during his interview with detectives, he mentions the name of his friend, Marvin Marable.
At the time of Lita's death, Marvin and James Sullivan had a very close relationship.
Remember, Marvin Marable is married to Lita's best friend, Poppy, who was in the Buckhead townhouse with her 3-year-old daughter the morning that Lita was murdered. But back before the shooting, the friendship hadn't always sat well with Marvin.
When Lita moved back to Atlanta, they started, hanging out together.
So she's disillusioned by her relationship. Did her failed relationship have any impact on your relationship?
Well, from the standpoint of them, being together all the time and going out, yeah.
Commiserating.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly didn't help. I can understand her being there for her friend, but, sometimes you can go overboard, which is what happened in our relationship.
Marable, a former New York State trooper turned entrepreneur, says Lita would often spend hours at his home with Poppy. And it was during this time, he says, coincidentally or not, that his own marriage began to unravel.
I found a letter where Poppy was planning to file for divorce.
So she was planning to file for divorce without your knowledge?
Oh, yeah.
That had to be a shocker.
It was.
So then you decided to try something a little questionable after that.
I have a background in law enforcement. I don't see it as questionable. It's your own telephone in your own house. I put a recorder on the, people call it a tap, on the phone, and I started recording conversations.
In the house phone?
Mm-hmm. On the house phone.
He began listening to Poppy and Lita's conversations and ended up recording more than 300 hours.
And during those very personal conversations between girlfriends, Marvin Marable learns that there may be some information that James Sullivan might be interested in learning that will be helpful for him in his divorce case.
He tells Sullivan about the tapes and what's on them, specifically Lita's post-divorce plans.
And soon enough, the two disgruntled husbands are conspiring to get the best of their soon-to-be ex-wives in divorce court.
Marvin Marable travels down to Palm Beach under a false name, and the two men listen to the tapes, and Marvin says, "I'm not going to record anymore," and Jim says, no, keep recording.
Was there talk of money?
Yeah, he offered $30,000.
Jim says to Marvin, if the judge decides to honor the postnuptial agreement, he's going to give Marvin $30,000 for the use of the information on the tapes.
What kinds of things did Lita talk about that could be helpful to either one of you?
There were some guys that, she would talk to, but she was legally separated.
But then, just a few days after Marvin and Jim's secret meeting at Casa Elita,
Poppy and Lita somehow discovered the recording device.
How did they react?
It wasn't nice. She filed for divorce the next day.
She was angry.
She was very angry.
Lita was upset too, so upset that she reported Marvin to the authorities, and he was charged with possession of an eavesdropping device. So when police questioned Sullivan about who might have a motive to murder his wife, he tells them to look no further than Marvin Marable.
And sure enough, only a few days after Lita's death, Marvin is being questioned by the Atlanta Police Department about Lita's murder.
I go down for the interview, and the first thing they did is read me my rights. And from there on, it was just a nightmare. I was a prime suspect.
You have a law enforcement background, so you knew what police
So
were.
I knew that I was being followed. I could pick the investigators, police, could pick them out all the time. Jim had mentioned my name to them. He said, look at Marvin Marable.
This was serious stuff.
Oh, yeah.
How worried were you?
I was very worried.
We're beyond devastated. Their eldest daughter was dead. Just 3 days after Lita's murder, they held a funeral.
Days dissolve into months, and authorities are no closer to finding Lita Sullivan's murderer.
The case is just sort of growing colder and colder by the minute.
And while Marvin Marable might have been angry at Lita for pressing those charges against him for eavesdropping, there was no evidence he was responsible for her death.
I know that people get wrongly accused, wrongly convicted, and so the only saving grace is the fact that I knew I was innocent.
By process of elimination is you can determine the pieces that don't fit.
and just eliminate them.
The way in which we eliminated Marvin Marable as a suspect, there was just not enough to connect him directly to the crime itself.
As for that eavesdropping device charge, Marvin was put on probation, which he completed, and then he was exonerated. But on those recordings Maribel made, Lita had talked about other men, something that her soon-to-be ex-husband Sullivan pointed out to police.
He made allegations that she was participating in extramarital affairs, and that perhaps this was the action of, you know, a disgruntled boyfriend.
We have a lot of major players. At this point in the investigation, we have a lot of suspects.
One of the first men police question is a professional athlete.
Lita and him had been friends when she was in Palm Beach. The police quickly found out that he was in prison for drug possession.
That athlete is behind bars when Lita is killed, so clearly he can't be the trigger man. Then investigators turn their sights to a prominent Atlanta businessman.
And he and Lita had been childhood friends, and they sort of rekindled their friendship. And they realized that he had no motive, and they found nothing that connected him.
Authorities also take a hard look at another suitor who had taken Lita to dinner the night before her death, and get this, had also given her 2 roses.
The suspect was a man named Bob Daniel, and Bob had had an incident a couple months before the murder where, in a drunken rage, he came to Lita's house, smashed his car into the garage, and as the cops were taking him away, he said, "I'm gonna kill that." So, serious red flag.
But that lead didn't go anywhere either.
Bob had just had quadruple bypass surgery. You know, the police ultimately decided that Bob had nothing to do with it.
It's the unknowing that makes it so difficult. And to know that there are individuals who may be walking around now planning and plotting to do the same thing to somebody else is abhorrent to me.
I remember having the impression it was like a festering wound for them.
The McClintons want to draw attention to a $25,000 reward in the case.
The cause of finding justice for Lita became their obsession, became their passion.
The reward is for the arrest and conviction of those individuals responsible for our daughter's murder.
To catch Lita's killer, the Atlanta Police Department assigns 2 veteran detectives to the case.
If Lieutenant Walker bears a resemblance to actor Billy D. Williams, Welcome Harris reminds one of Columbo, the dogged, disheveled detective of television fame.
Building a murder case was like making a mosaic. You know, you get a shiny piece of glass here, a gem there. You put it together and you hope that from it emerges the shimmering image of a killer.
This particular case deals with what I consider to be high society. It contains a little bit of everything. Intrigue, mystery.
These days, a lot of murders are solved using DNA technology, ring camera technology. But back then, it was detective work.
She was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
Most important thing found at the crime scene was the roses.
They canvassed all the area flower shops and quickly found that the roses had been purchased at the Botany Bay flower shop.
They interviewed the worker in there, and he told them that this guy came in about 8 o'clock and bought these roses and paid in cash and then left. And he was in a small car.
The florist gave a description of the man buying the flowers and another man who was waiting in the car.
So detectives know they're looking for at least 2 men.
Until yet another person is described to police. That flower delivery man who had looked Lita's neighbor right in the eye.
There was a next-door neighbor of Lita's, lived over on the right side of her condo. He lived there. His name was Bob Christensen.
He actually gave a description of the flower delivery man as a Caucasian, middle-aged man.
They went down to the police station and worked with a police artist and got sketches. As the sketches were being completed, the officers were realizing, obviously, that the shooter was not Jim Sullivan, and that the other individuals were all three distinct individuals. They didn't look anything like each other, so therefore we knew three people were involved.
For investigators, this has all the earmarks of only one thing: murder for hire.
All the evidence pointed to a hitman showing up at the front door, posing as a flower delivery man, and firing a gunshot into Lita's head.
With investigators now exploring the possibility that Lita was murdered by a hired gunman, another critical piece of evidence comes to light: a mysterious phone call.
And what they found was that on the same day that Lita was murdered, about an hour after the actual shooting, there was a collect phone call that was placed from a payphone right outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Was this a call from the killer?
I don't know about you. I haven't had a collect call from a payphone. So as a cop, you probably go, I wonder if that's connected.
And a tip from a woman 700 miles away may just be the big break investigators have been waiting for.
I said, anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
This was a huge puzzle of a case.
A hitman showing up at the front door, posing as a flower delivery man, firing a gunshot into Lita's head.
How did your puzzle-solving skills come into play?
You figure out what fits and what doesn't fit.
I want everyone listening to this to know that I am absolutely innocent.
The loss of a daughter.
They still don't have a murder weapon.
But they do have witnesses.
Do you know anybody that can possibly take care of my problem for me? Because I need some help here.
Anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
She suggested the flowers.
She suggested the flowers.
You actually brought in a doorbell. Why?
To have that sense of what Lita Sullivan experienced right before her murder. She's about to meet her maker.
It's a deadly delivery of a dozen pink roses. 35-year-old Lita McClinton Sullivan opens her front door and is suddenly gunned down.
On the year anniversary of Lita's death, there are no named suspects. They still don't have a murder weapon. They don't have a hitman. They don't have a paper trail that ties Jim or anyone else to a hit.
But that's about to change when they get Jim Sullivan's phone records.
On the same day that Lita was murdered, about an hour or so after the actual shooting, there was a collect phone call to James Sullivan's home in Palm Beach, Florida.
It turns out to be from a rest stop in Suwanee, Georgia, maybe 30 or 40 miles from Buckhead. Using a phone call to call another state, that opens up federal jurisdiction. In this case, that's the FBI.
We believed the phone call from Suwanee rest stop to his home in Palm Beach, Florida, was sufficient indication that a contract hitter may have called him after doing the job.
Enter Special Agent John Kingston, who takes a particular interest in that phone call and a whole slew of other calls Jim Sullivan made and received around the time of Lita's murder.
I got a whole year's worth, 6 months before the murder to 6 months after the murder.
Kingston notices a few calls, and one of them was to Bob Christensen, Lita's neighbor. When Kingston talks to Bob, he finds out that Jim had called Bob 3 days before the murder.
Sullivan said, had he seen anything suspicious around Lita's townhouse?
And Bob finds it strange. He hasn't talked to Jim in over a year.
Bob Christensen shares something else with Agent Kingston. On the same day Jim Sullivan called him, 3 days before the fatal flower delivery, Lita heard a loud knock on her door at 5 or 6 in the morning. It was so early and so unnerving, she didn't answer it.
So that made the call that he got from Jim even more suspicious.
Kingston also finds that a call is made between Jim's house and a Howard Johnson's motel in Atlanta, just a couple of miles from Lita's house. This is really strange. One thing that he's learned about Jim is that he's not a Hojo's kind of guy. So he goes to the Howard Johnsons and asks if he can look through the records.
They gave me the shoebox with all the registration cards, and I pick out 3 that I thought, well, these are awfully interesting. So I say, do you guys have the phone records? They said, yeah, sure we do. And I'm thinking, boy, these people keep really good records, and they keep them for a long time, and I'm really glad. They bring me the phone records for January 13th. I'm flipping through them, and all of a sudden I see 305 Palm Beach, South Florida area code. And I'm pretty sure it's Jim's number. And so I check my records real quick. I go, yep, that's his number. And then I look, and I said, oh, look, it's from 518. That's one of the 3 cards I pulled out. Well, it just so happens I have a copy of it here. And one of the things it imparts is 3 individuals checked into the room. The individual who actually registered used the name Johnny Furr. But 3 individuals is important to me because I think 3 people involved in the crime. They put their car down as a Toyota 85 with a North Carolina plate. We believe that a Toyota was the getaway car for the murder. So there's 2 coincidences already.
But remember, these motel records are from January 13th. Lita was murdered 3 days later on the 16th. Special Agent Kingston is beginning to surmise that the killers may have tried and failed to get to her once before.
What I believe it to be is the killers having come down 3 days before the actual murder was committed, knocking on her door, her not answering it, and them having to stop and regroup and figure out what plan B is going to be. So I am in love with this registration card and becomes the focal point of my life for the next several months.
Kingston's next move is to locate this so-called Johnny Furr with the North Carolina license plate.
And to my surprise, there are 150 John or Johnny Furrs in North Carolina. But to my great surprise, 115 of these 150 are in a very small circle in North Carolina, between the 3 cities of Albemarle, Concord, and Kannapolis.
They're going to knock on every door and find this Johnny Furr. Of course, they're coming from Georgia, and anytime the FBI goes and investigates in another state, they need that state's approval. And just as they're about to get to the state border, their boss calls them and says, North Carolina's denying you entry, and they'll take it from here.
And that pretty much kills my case. that kills my case.
Yeah, soon after that, Agent Kingston is transferred to another job, and that whole investigation just sort of fades away. Meantime, in Palm Beach, Jim and Suki are living the high life. So with Lita out of the picture, Jim is free to marry Suki, which he does 8 months after Lita's murder.
He's thinking that he's the cat's meow. Eating in restaurants in Palm Beach, going to parties, got another attractive woman on his arm.
Jim drives around town in a Rolls Royce and gets into a fender bender and has to go to traffic court. Jim says to the judge, well, you've misunderstood. I wasn't even driving that day. Suki was driving. So the judge says, we're going to throw it out. However, the cop who was on the scene catches wind, and he says Suki wasn't even in the car that day. It was Jim driving alone. So now Jim has perjured himself, as has Suki.
Jim ultimately got convicted of perjury, was given a year probation and a year of home confinement.
Suki Sullivan also receives a year of probation.
Suki's freaking out. When she gets charged with perjury on his behalf, she's like, I'm done with this. Suki files for divorce from Jim. And the trial that follows is the juiciest, craziest gossip in town. So when it's Suki's turn to testify, she drops a bomb.
Did he talk to you about his former wife, Lisa?
Yes.
Tell me what it was he said to you about Lisa.
You can hear a pin drop. Suki files for divorce from Jim.
Not surprisingly, it's another disputed divorce. But what might have been typical testimony about alimony takes a sudden turn in court.
Tell me what it was he said to you about Lisa.
He hired someone to get rid of it.
I'm sorry?
He hired someone to get rid of her.
She claimed that he confessed to her that he had Lita killed.
This became a bombshell in the investigation of the murder of Lita Sullivan.
Suki Sullivan's divorce testimony may be big news for the FBI, but it has zero impact on the divorce judgment, which favors her husband, Jim Sullivan, in nearly every way.
His divorce was complete, but his life with turmoil was just beginning.
The opulent ocean-facing Palm Beach Palace may look like something out of The Great Gatsby, but while we watched, a new chapter in a crime story was unfolding.
We develop information here at WSB. There's going to be a raid on Jim Sullivan's Palm Beach mansion, and that is the biggest break in the Lita Sullivan case since the murder itself.
Investigators from the FBI, Atlanta Police, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation were on the grounds of a mansion identified as that of James Sullivan.
All of a sudden, Jim Sullivan is clearly in the crosshairs of federal authorities.
They got a tip that Jim, now a convicted felon, has guns in the house. Of course, you're not allowed to have guns if you're a convicted felon. So they put together a sweeping affidavit to get a search warrant.
We did see a number of guns loaded into a car and this box carried out.
When they found the guns, he was in violation of his probation, and so he went to jail for 9 months.
All this time, a federal grand jury has been convening in Atlanta.
They've got what they found in the mansion. They got what they found in the phone records. They've got Suki Sullivan. They've got the neighbors. What they don't have are the identities of the hit team. There's a problem, though.
We, the federal government, have a 5-year statute of limitations, which is going to be up on January 16th of '92.
With 5 or 6 days to go before it expired, the U.S. attorney made a bold decision. We're going to take our best shot with what we got right now, so they indict Jim Sullivan.
Jim Sullivan is indicted on multiple counts of arranging Lita's murder for hire through interstate phone calls.
Millionaire James V. Sullivan is on trial in connection with an alleged murder for hire plot. Here he arrives for the first day of trial testimony.
It was a trial that transfixed Atlanta. I mean, it was something we were covering on basically a daily basis. But we couldn't have it on camera because it's federal court.
It looks like the family is finally going to have some accountability for the murder of their daughter, Lita.
The prosecution suggests the killers were calling Sullivan from the rest stop to say the job was done. The defense suggests otherwise.
Jim Sullivan is lawyered up with the best criminal defense lawyers that you can find anywhere in Atlanta and maybe in the whole country.
There is no evidence at this point in this case who placed that call or whether that call was placed by anyone connected with the crime.
The prosecutor spent 2 weeks telling their side of the story.
Suki, the woman he married months after Lita's death, delivered some of the most dramatic testimony the jury has heard.
They build what they feel like is a really strong case.
And then a big bombshell hits.
The judge says, I'm forced to dismiss this case for lack of evidence.
Judge Marvin Shube ruled that, in effect, even if Sullivan may have been involved in the murder for hire, the government fell short in proving the phone calls related to the murder.
This is one of the most difficult decisions I had to make because I firmly believe in the jury system.
And then he looks at Jim and he says, "You've been acquitted."
This was ultra shocking.
Suddenly it's over, and Jim is a free man.
I want everyone listening to this to know that I am absolutely innocent. I had nothing to do with Lita's death. Her death was a great tragedy, and I thank God and my attorneys that this ordeal is over.
The family at that point, I guess, is just sort of at a loss. How devastating was that for them?
They felt like the justice system had let them down.
I was not expecting this. It's extremely difficult.
The system today is weighed in the favor of the defense.
James Sullivan seems to have gotten away with murder.
But Lita's parents aren't giving up.
They file a wrongful death suit in Palm Beach, Florida, and they win.
We, the jury, return the following verdict.
The jury deems that Jim is guilty of wrongful death.
Total damages of the estate of Lita McClinton Sullivan, $4 million.
But Sullivan is able to hide his assets and not pay any of the civil judgment.
Jim Sullivan appealed their civil judgment, and he won by having the Florida court say that they had filed it after the Florida statute of limitations.
Once again, Jim has wiggled out of any responsibility, and the family is left dumbfounded.
Until
a call is received out of the blue.
A young woman comes forward. It proved to be the break in the case that everyone was looking.
10 years have gone by since Lita Sullivan was gunned down on her doorstep when a tip comes in from a town 700 miles away.
A call is received out of the blue, and the individual calling is an attorney in Beaumont, Texas. He has a receptionist whose name is Belinda Trahan, who has told him a very unusual story about her boyfriend, Tony Harwood.
Belinda and Tony lived together in Albemarle, North Carolina. And he was a long-distance truck driver for North American Van Lines.
He basically drove a moving truck.
Belinda tells her boss about a time that Tony came home from a long-haul trucking trip and said that a rich white man in Florida offered to pay him to, quote, take care of his black wife in Georgia. At the time, Belinda didn't believe it. She thought he must be cheating on her.
Belinda thought that it was Tony just trying to get out of town and go down to Atlanta to the strip bars.
Until he took her to meet this rich white guy in a diner somewhere, and he got a wad full of money.
She says he sits down briefly in their booth and gives Tony Harwood the balance owed for the hit on the man's wife.
Belinda Trahan tells her boss that soon after this bizarre trip, she broke up with Tony Harwood and moved to Texas. But now, 11 years later, she says that he mysteriously reached out to her again, asking her to meet him at a nearby truck stop.
She's afraid that he may commit harm to her.
And it's this new tip from Belinda Trahan that sends Georgia authorities to the Lone Star State, turning up the heat on an otherwise cold case.
Georgia Bureau of Investigator Agent John Lang takes a detective from the Atlanta Police Department and goes down to Texas to talk to Belinda.
She was with Tony when they met this mysterious man at this diner that they were meeting at. We wanted to show her a lineup of pictures in hopes that she could pick Sullivan out of it.
And she takes her pink fingernail and taps right on Jim Sullivan's face and says, "This is the man."
My plan of attack was to get some recordings with her and Tony. So we got her to get in touch with Tony again,
She's talking to him and trying to coax information out of him, knowing John Lang is listening on her end. And Tony gives enough information that places him at the scene at the time.
We had the phone calls with Tony. She picked Jim Sullivan out of the lineup. There was still more investigation to do. We really didn't know who Tony Harwood was.
John Lang knows that Tony worked at North American Van Lines. So he calls up North American Van Lines and he says, hey, you don't happen to have your records from 11 years ago? And the guy says, yeah, there's some boxes full of files up in a musty attic. You're more than welcome to go poke around.
We went up into a hot attic and opened the first box that I went through. And about the third document I looked at was Jim Sullivan. His address was on it, Palm Beach, Florida. His signature was on it, and Tony Harwood's signature was on it.
He finds a bill of lading showing that Tony Harwood moved furniture for Jim Sullivan 2 months before the murder. And it's the paper trail he needs. It's like the jackpot.
Astounding. I don't know any other way to explain it. I mean, open this box and like the third record I look at, here it is. I mean, it just like it was meant to be.
On a Sunday morning in April of 1998, John Lang and local authorities go knock on Tony's door in Albemarle, North Carolina. Tony answers the door.
And he said, you know, I've been waiting on you boys for a long time.
They take Tony to the Albemarle police station. Lang interviews Tony for 3 hours in this tiny room. But at the end of the day, Tony admits to taking money from Jim, $25,000, to take care of Lita. He also tells the detectives that he wasn't the one to pull the trigger, but that he was there the day of the murder.
He went through the whole case, and throughout the interview, he incriminated himself even more. I mean, admitted that he was there. He knew what happened. So he was arrested for murder of Lita Sullivan, and we took him back to Atlanta that day.
After Tony's arrest, things moved pretty quickly.
We are here today to announce the issuance of a warrant for the arrest of James V. Sullivan.
They got enough to get Sullivan, and now boom, Sullivan hears of this and blows. He takes off.
We have reason to believe that he's outside the country.
He's just gone, vanished.
Investigators say he could be anywhere.
He is nowhere to be found.
We have reason to believe that he's outside the country.
More than a decade after his wife Lita was murdered, Jim Sullivan seems to be playing a game of catch me if you can with authorities.
There is an international manhunt for James Sullivan.
Well, Jim moved to Costa Rica, actually bought a home there. In 1998, after an arrest warrant was issued for him, he immediately, like that night, went to Panama.
If you have any information concerning James Sullivan, you should contact the nearest U.S. Embassy or consulate.
We didn't know exactly where he had flown from Panama, and we didn't know exactly where he had gone.
His trail goes cold.
They put him on Interpol, and it was just cold.
They've tapped phone lines, anybody that he might have called, and he's called no one, not even his mother.
There was a few tips that came in. The tips are just dead ends.
The McClintons, they're dumbfounded that this guy could, get away again.
But in late 1999, with Sullivan still completely off the grid, the heartbroken Emery and Joanne McClinton do get some good news.
Last week came this, a court decision reinstating a $4 million judgment against Jim Sullivan in connection with a wrongful death case brought in effect by Lita's estate.
Lita's family and law enforcement officials hope that a renewed hunt for Sullivan's money will help smoke him out.
Where you find Sullivan's money, you're going to find him close by.
But even this goes nowhere.
Fast forward to 2002. There is no sign of Jim Sullivan.
We tried every effort in our arsenal to try and locate him, to put him on the FBI's wanted list, but to also put him on the top 10 list, which is very unusual. You don't get on the top 10 list very easily. Then we also featured him on America's Most Wanted.
The most recent picture we have of Sullivan is at least 5 years old, so the FBI agent hands this photo, which may bear a closer resemblance to Sullivan's appearance today. If you recognize James Sullivan from either of these photographs, call us now at 1-800-CRIME-TV.
A man sees America's Most Wanted on television and goes, I know that guy. He lives in my condo complex in Chiam, Thailand. And sure enough, he calls the authorities.
He went to Panama, to Venezuela, and eventually to Thailand, where he got a beachfront condo.
He spends his days walking on the beach, sitting by the pool, occasionally playing tennis, as though no other troubles in the world. The Thai police knock on Jim Sullivan's door on July 2nd, 2002, and say, you're under arrest. The McClintons can hardly believe it.
We found out from the FBI, and that was a moment of jubilation.
15 years is a long time to concentrate on the loss of a daughter. And we had determination, and we had the will. We also had all of these individuals behind us.
Almost as soon as Jim Sullivan is arrested for murder, Tony Harwood, who has continued to deny being the trigger man, agrees to a plea deal.
Tony kind of sees the writing on the wall.
Harwood just decided that he would plead guilty, the negotiated plea for manslaughter, and that, in turn, that he would testify against Jim Sullivan.
It took 2 years, but he finally was extradited back to Atlanta in 2004.
He got off the plane. He was wearing a single shoe because he had such terrible gout in his foot. But he gets off and gets taken to Fulton County Jail. And there's this sort of cumulative sigh of relief.
To be clear, Sullivan being tried for murder in Georgia is not double jeopardy. For one thing, it is a state case, and the previous one was a federal case, and that specifically was for arranging Lita's murder for hire over the phone.
The elected district attorney appoints me, along with a couple of other lawyers, to prosecute the case.
This was a huge puzzle of a case.
Right.
How did your puzzle-solving skills come into play?
There's no cutting corners, and you spread the pieces out, and then you figure out what fits and what doesn't fit. And that's kind of what the prosecution of James Sullivan was like. It was putting together all these different pieces so that we could make sure that the prosecution of the case was done accurately and with integrity.
What concerned you going into this trial?
He was rich. He was a white male. He had escaped the federal authorities before, and he had two of the best criminal defense attorneys representing him.
They are sharp, and if they can find a way out, they're going to find a way out.
There will not be one shred of physical evidence that links Jim Sullivan to this crime.
Jim has eluded justice so many times that there's a real palpable fear that he's going to get away with it, that he's going to elude justice.
Sullivan is finally on trial here in Fulton County for the murder of his wife, Lita. For her heartbroken parents, this day couldn't come soon enough.
The pain, believe it or not, it increases. It does not decrease. The shock decreases. The depression decreases. But the pain continues.
It was an A-team of prosecutors, great courtroom performers.
Clint Rucker was the lead prosecutor, and Anna Green, Kelly Hill, Sheila Ross.
And the evidence will show that the person who sent that hitman to Lita's door is the only person in the world that profited from her death. It is the only person in the world who met Tony Harwood and paid him off for killing her. And is the only person in the world who fled halfway around the world to avoid facing you.
Jury was 9 women and 3 men.
The jury is also racially mixed.
Jim Sullivan had Ed Garland and Don Samuel. Again, the people who won that big courtroom victory against the feds.
What the state relies on is 2 types of evidence. Circumstantial evidence, and then the testimony of con men.
The state initially started out the nature of the crime and what happened that morning.
I heard 2 sounds. They sounded to me like steel hitting steel.
I just didn't want to believe that it was a gun. And so I hesitated for a second, and then I really knew that it was a gun.
She was able to squeeze my hand each time I spoke with her, like she understood what I was saying. And for many, many years after this, I thought that's all it was. And then one day I realized that she was comforting me more than I was comforting her. That was the sort of lady I felt she was.
They had the phone calls that the FBI had found.
There was a call from this room to Mr. Sullivan's home at 7:44 in the morning.
But all this testimony notwithstanding, it's Belinda Trahan and Tony Harwood who everybody wants to hear from.
Belinda Trahan was the most important witness in the case.
He told me that some white guy who wanted to take out his black wife. I didn't believe it.
Why not?
I've been with him for 3 years, over 3 years. I mean, I figured he met someone because we were on the outs.
Most chilling about Belinda's testimony is that she confirms that there was at least one failed attempt on Lita's life.
She testifies that when Tony had gone to Lita's house on January 13th, that she didn't come to the door. They drove back to North Carolina and told Belinda that, you know, it didn't work.
But Belinda testifies that hearing that from her boyfriend left her incredulous.
I said, just don't even lie to me. I said, because anyone knows that if you wanted to get a woman to answer the door, all you would have to do is take flowers to the door.
Did you in any way mean for that to be a suggestion as to how to get the job accomplished?
No, not at all.
Here's Belinda Trahan, and she is falling on the sword about what she did.
She suggested the flowers.
She suggested the flowers, and she admitted that on the stand.
You brought in the diner booth where they sat. Why couldn't you just tell the jury and show pictures?
I want you to see the puzzle once it's all put together. Yeah, I can show you the box. I can show you a photograph of it. But when I put it together and I show it to you, you'll never forget it.
Pushed the paper across the table like this, and then Tony put his hand on it and took it from there.
And there was a particular moment when she is asked to stand up in court and identified the person she witnessed give Tony Harwood an envelope full of money.
Please, point him out.
It's right there. He can't even make eye contact.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, James Sullivan.
But if prosecutors feel like Belinda Trahan's testimony is helping their case, they have to know that it's just as big a risk to put Tony Harwood on the stand.
Can you show the jurors the body language Mr. Sullivan used and the tone of voice, if it's possible, that he used when he was explaining to you that his wife Lita was a problem?
You know, I've got this wife of mine up in Atlanta. And she is just trying to take everything I've got. And I don't know what to do about it. I need someone to take care of my problem. Do you know anybody that can possibly take care of my problem for me? Because I need some help here.
We could prove Tony Harwood and James Sullivan actually met each other. So I spent the first part of Tony Harwood's examination confirming his signature on the hotel receipt.
And I put signature, Johnny Fur.
The fact that he actually went to the flower shop.
Who actually went inside the flower shop to purchase the flowers?
I did.
They had Tony Harwood saying that he was the one who made the collect call to Jim Sullivan's house.
What did you say to him?
I said, Merry Christmas. And he said, I understand. And that was it.
What were you trying to convey to Mr. Sullivan by giving him that signal, those code words?
That his problem was taken care of.
The defense had their chance to cross-examine Harwood. Not a single question. The two key witnesses were, of course, Belinda Trahan and Tony Harwood. And so, in closing arguments, the defense assailed their credibility.
You should reject everything that came out of his mouth. Harwood says envelope in the bathroom. She says an envelope at this booth over here.
Garland presents to the jury a letter-sized envelope stuffed with bills. Harwood had said it was all cash in $20 bills.
See, oops, some of it fell out, and some more. It won't fit in an envelope. The whole story just doesn't make sense.
In your closing arguments, you actually brought in a doorbell. Why? What was the point?
I wanted the jurors to have that sense of what Lita Sullivan experienced right before her murder.
An ordinary moment.
In an ordinary moment. The second reason why I did it is because James Sullivan liked to read books. And one of his favorite authors wrote a book called For Whom the Bell Tolls.
I'm going to ask you through your verdict of guilty to each and every count to tell James Vincent Sullivan for whom the bell tolls. Tell him that it tolls for thee. For you. For you.
And then I rang the doorbell 3 times.
As the jury goes out to deliberate, I think there's a real fear. Are they going to do it this time, or is it going to be like every other time?
I do not see this as a slam dunk for the state.
There's this anxiety. You're worried, but you're hopeful. I don't care who you talk to that does this kind of work as a litigator. They will tell you, oh, I can look at the jurors and I probably can tell you what they're going to do. No, you don't.
We do have breaking news at this hour. The jury having reached a verdict in the trial of Jim Sullivan.
The jury came back within a few hours on the same day.
It was so silent, and the tension was just palpable.
There's this anxiety. You don't know what it's going to be. You don't know how it's going to turn out. And you're worried, but you're hopeful.
It's hard not to think of Lita's family, her parents especially, after so many fits and starts to win justice for their firstborn child. It comes down to this moment.
The judge says,
"Ma'am, would you publish the verdict?"
And then from that moment until they get finished, nobody is breathing.
Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Vincent Sullivan, guilty of malice murder.
I got a chance to hug Emory McClinton. I had never been hugged so tight before. This was his baby. And we had finally, after 19 years, brought that man a sense of satisfaction. I'll never forget it. The conviction of James Sullivan was the biggest puzzle that I had solved in my career, and it is one that gave me the most satisfaction that I had ever experienced as a prosecutor.
The court hears victim impact statements. What a loss it was to have Lita gone from their lives.
I dream of Lita often. She is smiling and walking in my direction, and I in hers. But we never reach each other.
The jury came back and gave him life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I am so very pleased, and I'm happy. What we were waiting for was something in our judicial system, something to happen and to bring it all together, and that's what you see today.
Why did it take 20 years, do you think?
It goes back to the resources.
He had privilege?
White privilege, completely. He knew how to manipulate people, and he had the resources to do that.
You've got a black victim, you've got a white defendant. Did race hover in this courtroom over this case at all?
I think in our criminal justice system, unfortunately, race always permeates throughout a case. But I'm thankful to say the evidence in the case overcame that racial component.
They never received any money. Is there money? Where is this money?
He's been able to secret his money. For the McClintons, seeing him rot in a prison in South Georgia brings them a whole lot more satisfaction.
This is a woman who you never met, I've never met, most of the people involved in this case never met her, and yet her life really made an impact. When somebody dies in this kind of manner, they don't stop being a member of the family, they don't stop being a member of the community, they never stop mattering.
David.
A single mother with a big heart.
If you needed anything, she was always there.
She was a sweet girl. Everybody loved her.
Is the victim of a bizarre murder.
Duct tape had been wrapped around her head about 14 times.
This is nothing I had ever seen before or even heard of before.
Leaving her young son as the only witness.
A 4-year-old child had been just mere feet away from his mother being killed.
Investigators focus on the men in her life.
This guy, he wouldn't look at us. He was more nervous than normal.
And that polygraph test, he passed. It was frustrating as hell.
She was using Norma's house for these sexual liaisons.
To unveil a killer hiding in plain sight.
Of everyone we dealt with, he was maybe the coolest customer of the bunch.
People didn't see that inner demon. He was an unexpected killer.
It just blows you away.
Port Hueneme, California, a peaceful beach town on the Pacific coast.
It's a hidden gem. Port Hueneme is about 60 miles north of LA. It's a completely different environment. It's a lot more relaxed.
It's a quiet town, and it's a town that has, for a long time, a ridiculously low crime rate and very rarely a homicide.
But the tranquility of the seaside community is shattered one summer morning when police get an urgent call.
On June 1st, 1993, it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, our dispatch received a call of a possible homicide.
An ex-husband had called up and said that his ex-wife had been murdered.
We hadn't had a homicide in over 3 years. It took me a second to realize, okay, this is real.
Detectives arrive to begin the investigation, but nothing can prepare them for the scene inside.
I got inside the house, and then it was like, oh my God. This is just too bizarre for words. She's laying on the floor, head encased in duct tape. It had been partially cut away, but it appeared as though someone had tried to wrap her like a mummy.
It went from the top of her forehead to the chin.
It was just incredibly strange. This is nothing I had ever seen before or even heard of before.
And some rigor mortis had set in the back portion of her body because she was laying on the back. Usually rigor mortis takes a number of hours to show up. We estimated that the victim probably died in the early morning hours. When I saw that duct tape, the first thing that entered my mind was this was somebody she knew. Whoever did it didn't want to have her look at them while they were committing the crime.
Looking to unravel the mystery of this bizarre murder, detectives turn to the victim's ex-husband, who claims to have discovered the body.
At the house, the ex-husband was there, his brother was there, and 2 younger sons were there.
The ex-husband, Tony, identifies the victim as 32-year-old Norma Rodriguez, mother to 2 boys, Andrew, 11 years old, and Austin, 4 years old.
Tony, he said that he had come over to the house to pick up the kids to take them to school, which was his regular practice.
The 2 boys were still asleep in their beds. When Tony realized what had happened to their mother, he told them to stay in their room until police arrived.
Tony, his brother Hector, and the 2 sons were transported to the Port Hueneme Police Department, where they were going to be interviewed separately. Tony and Hector were first at the house, and we needed to determine what happened.
Police continue to comb through the house looking for clues.
It was not a scene of extreme violence. There wasn't blood anywhere. There weren't a lot of things overturned.
In the bedroom, we located her purse, and it was intact. There wasn't anything that seemed to be missing.
This was not like a burglary that had gone wrong.
There's no sign of forced entry into the home. Then, something else catches the detective's eye.
I noticed a set of keys that were on the floor. They were in an unusual location, close to her body. We checked and confirmed they were Norma's house keys.
But why were Norma's keys lying next to her body? As investigators finish processing the scene, Norma's sister, Aralia, arrives.
I was supposed to pick her up because we were going to go looking for a car for her. And I had been calling her, and I drove to her house. That's when I saw the yellow tape. I saw the police department there, and that's what they told me would happen. And my worst nightmares, did I ever think that this would happen to my sister? It is horrible, horrible.
Norma Rodriguez was born and raised in rural Texas.
We're 7 sisters and 1 brother. She was the middle child, and, I was really close to Norma. She was very quiet, very reserved, a very big heart. If you needed anything, she was always there.
I first met Norma in 1975 in junior high school. We were 14 years old, and we became friends right away. Well, we used to hang out together and just go everywhere together. She could be feisty, but she was a sweet girl. Everybody loved her.
After high school, Norma moved to Oxnard, California for college and soon fell for another student named Tony.
She loved him. She just loved being with him.
Their college romance became more serious, and 2 years later in 1982, Tony popped the question. They soon had their first son, Andrew, and their second son, Austin, arrived 7 years later.
She was just a great mom. Norma was very devoted to her boys. Her boys were her life.
But in 1991, after almost 10 years together, Tony and Norma's marriage became strained.
Tony was really never around.
She was getting into arguments and fights with Tony, asking him to provide for them. She realized it would be an easier life for her if she just went on her own without Tony. And that's what she did.
Later that year, Norma moved with her sons to the neighboring town of Port Hueneme. She got a job at a local retail store and started a new chapter in her life.
Being a single mom, people might think that's a hard job. She enjoyed it. And it was hard for her, but she was happy.
Who would want to take the life of this loving mother, and in such a bizarre way? Later that day, at police headquarters, detectives begin to interview Norma's ex-husband, Tony Rodriguez, and his brother, Hector.
As the first two parties to the scene, the investigators had to look at them.
The detectives asked Tony about how he found Norma earlier that day.
Tony, he said that he had knocked on the door, but Norma didn't answer. Sons Andrew and Austin were asleep. The door was locked, so then he used a credit card in order to slip the lock, and he was able to open the front door.
When Tony and Hector entered the living room, they saw Norma lying on the floor, her face wrapped in duct tape.
Hector told us that he cut the tape because they didn't know whether she was deceased or not, and they wanted to try to make it easier for her to breathe. He's the one that had the scissors in his possession, and he's the one that decided to cut the tape off of her face.
We thought, wow, that's a little strange. Why is this guy doing this? Why is he messing up our evidence? You know, Hector told us that the body was still somewhat warm. And that didn't make sense because by that time she had full rigor mortis. I mean, she had obviously been deceased for a number of hours. I just wasn't buying it.
Investigators are skeptical. Is Hector misleading police because the two men have something to hide? They hone in on Tony and Hector as possible suspects.
We don't know these people. We don't know what they're capable of.
Tony and Hector are suspicious. And Tony, being Norma's ex, he was right at the top of our list.
Coming up, detectives broaden their hunt for a possible killer.
We've got countless potential witnesses, countless potential suspects, interviews with co-workers.
We didn't know who it was. I just wanted him off the streets.
Investigators suspect a love interest from Norma's past has something to hide.
It was a brief but intense relationship.
It was that selfishness, that narcissistic quality that would cause him to end someone else's life.
And what police uncover shocks everyone.
All this time, were we dealing with a true sociopath and, couldn't see it?
Mother of two, Norma Rodriguez, has been found murdered with her head wrapped in duct tape. Less than 24 hours into the investigation, detectives are interviewing their first suspect, starting with her ex-husband, Tony Rodriguez.
In a case like this, statistics will show you that an overwhelming amount of the time, it's going to be that significant other or former significant other who ends up being your suspect.
Investigators ask Tony about his relationship with Norma in the weeks leading up to her death.
At the time, Tony said that they had been separated for a couple of years. I don't believe they had filed for divorce yet, but they were living separately, and Tony had visitation rights. They weren't close friends anymore, but they tried to maintain the friendship for the boys.
But police have a different account from Norma's family.
We learned that shortly before the homicide, there were some conflicts.
Norma, she was upset at the fact that he would come make excuses to come over with the boys, but he would end up wanting to stay there. She used to complain about that. I said, don't let him in. He doesn't have the right to come into your house. And she was a little timid when it came down to Tony.
According to loved ones, Tony couldn't accept that Norma was moving on. Detectives press him about his whereabouts in the hours surrounding Norma's murder.
Tony said that on May the 30th, early afternoon, he talked with Norma and asked if our son Andrew could stay with him. Tony had tickets to an Angels game the next day, and so they agreed that that was okay.
Tony says Andrew was dropped back home the next night. At the time, Tony never entered the house. He found Norma's body the next day. Did Norma's ex innocently walk into the crime scene that morning, or had something more sinister happened?
The potential motive with him was he wanted the kids. Maybe one thing led to another, and he lost control.
In a room nearby, police questioned Tony's brother Hector, since he was with him when Norma's body was found. They ask where he and Tony went after dropping Norma's son at his mom's.
Hector, he said that they had been at his residence with other family members in the city of Oxnard. And when we interviewed those family members, they corroborated what Tony and Hector told us.
Knowing their alibis are far from concrete, detectives ask Tony and Hector to take polygraph tests.
The results of the tests were that they were being honest in stating that they did not know anything about the homicide.
With no hard evidence to hold them, investigators are forced to let the two men go. News of Norma's death quickly spreads through the small community.
When I found out about her being murdered like that, I had told my cousin that I had just talked to her. It can't be true because I just talked to her. It was true.
At the police station, detectives receive the results of the autopsy.
The cause of death was established as manual strangulation. Norma wasn't a tiny woman. Whoever did this had to possess significant upper body strength.
Some important details emerge about the duct tape.
The length of it was approximately 20 feet and had been wrapped around her head about 14 times.
The duct tape was examined and there were skin cells that were discovered. But in 1993, DNA technology was in its infancy. You had to have a fairly significant sample size in order to potentially get a result from it. In Norma's case, they didn't have nearly enough in these samples.
To find out who did this, we have to dig deeper.
Searching for new leads, detectives hope Norma's 11-year-old son, Andrew, can help. With Tony's consent, the detectives talk with him at the station.
When you're interviewing any type of a witness, it's a difficult process. And you have to understand that. When you're interviewing a child, it's extremely difficult. We interviewed Andrew, and we just wanted to try to get as much information as we could. From the date of the homicide, Andrew had gone to a baseball game with his father and his uncle. Later at night, Andrew was dropped off at the house, and the house was dark.
Andrew walked up to the front door, found it was locked. He went around to his bedroom, saw that the window was open, and crawled in.
Then, Andrew shares a disturbing detail told to him by his younger brother.
When Andrew came into the bedroom, 4-year-old Austin had said, "Mommy has a Band-Aid on her face." That didn't register immediately with Andrew, and so he went to bed. And it wasn't until morning that Andrew found out exactly what Austin meant by a Band-Aid. It just ripped at your heart knowing that a 4-year-old child had been just mere feet away from his mother being killed. And at one point he had come out, he had seen his mother's body. That just ripped at me a lot.
What else had Norma's youngest son, Austin, seen? Detectives decide to speak to the 4-year-old.
At first he was withdrawn. He really didn't want to talk about it, which was understandable. I knew that because he's 4 years old, and I couldn't have gone on much longer than I did. And I knew that I needed to stop. But then he mentioned a man by the name of Corey.
He brought up the name Corey as someone who was over at the house at that time. Now we've got this person who might end up being our prime suspect.
But who was Corey? Had he killed Norma? Did the single mom's youngest son just solve her murder?
We've got to run it down as far as it goes.
Police are investigating the bizarre murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez. Her youngest son, Austin, says he saw a man named Corey at their home around the time of the murder.
At that time, we had no idea who Corey was, but it was something that had to be checked out.
Detectives learn from the family that Corey could be Corey Davis, one of Norma's co-workers. So they head to her workplace.
First step was find out, to what extent Corey knew Norma, if they socialized, if they were friends away from work, and so forth.
Corey was more nervous than normal. In talking with him, he wouldn't look at us. He kept staring down, not tuning in or paying attention.
Corey's unusual behavior during their conversation alarms investigators.
He did not like being talked to and having to answer anything.
They questioned Corey about his relationship with Norma.
He stated that he would interact with Norma at work, but they weren't that close with each other, and they didn't have any interactions beyond that.
Detectives want to know if he was at Norma's house near the time of her murder, as young Austin claimed.
He made it pretty clear that he wasn't at the house at that time. Instead, he said the night of the homicide he was at home. The only people who were there at home with him were his parents. We needed to find out how much of what he was telling us was, provably true.
While officers are sent to check Corey's alibi, detectives speak to Norma's other coworkers, starting with her friend, Beatrice.
Beatrice came to Norma's house on Sunday, the day before the homicide. Norma had a get-together, a small barbecue at her house for several of her co-workers.
Police asked Beatrice if she remembers anything unusual about the day of the barbecue.
Beatrice said that while she was there, suddenly Norma can't find her keys anymore. And they ended up searching all over Norma's house, trying to figure out what happened to Norma's keys.
They didn't find them, and then they're laying beside her body, beside her house at the time she's found. We figured someone had taken her keys, and that's how they were able to enter the house.
It's a significant lead. Does this mean the killer stole the keys at Norma's barbecue? Detectives renew their focus on her inner circle.
From everything we knew, this was a pretty personal crime. We had a certain confidence that the killer knew Norma.
At the police station, investigators discover information they received from Corey Davis has some holes.
One of the things we do with everyone is we find out what their addresses are, their date of birth, everything else. And with Corey Davis, one of the things we noticed was that his address he gave us was not the address where he was actually living. So there was a discrepancy there.
Why would Corey withhold that information from detectives? They wonder what else he's hiding.
But at this point in time, Corey jumped out at us as this is the one we need to concentrate on.
Police bring Corey in for an interview, but he's far from helpful.
He's like, well, I don't want to be involved in this. Well, I understand that, but like it or not, you are part of this case. If you want to be eliminated from the suspect pool, the best way to do that is to cooperate with us.
Detectives share details of the crime with Corey to observe his reaction.
With the information that we were giving to him, he was obviously upset, and he took it really hard.
Corey denies any involvement in Norma's death. They ask him to take a polygraph test.
He submitted to the test, and he passed.
All detectives have tying Corey to the crime scene is a statement from Norma's 4-year-old son. But police know he could be mistaken, given his young age and traumatic experience.
At that point, Corey worked his way down the ladder of possible suspects dramatically.
1 week into the investigation, detectives are out of leads. They look at who else was at Norma's barbecue the day before she was killed. Friends tell them about a former coworker named Warren Mackey.
Warren Mackey was a previous co-worker of Norma's, and also he lived in fairly close proximity to her.
Warren and Norma hit it off and became friends.
They worked together for a while, and the work relationship became a social relationship. It appeared that Warren had something more than just a friendship interest in Norma.
I remember Norma telling me that there was a guy there that she used to work with, and he was always trying to talk to her and trying to ask her out.
Talking to Norma's coworkers, detectives learned that Warren pursued Norma, but she wasn't interested in him romantically.
Norma told Beatrice and some of the other people that she felt that Warren wanted more than to be friends, and that she wasn't interested in that. She tried to curtail any attempts that he may have made to ask her out. Some of the employees that we talked with felt that Warren wasn't real pleased with that. He liked Norma, and that he wanted the relationship a little bit more than what it was.
But Norma still tried to maintain their friendship.
She noticed he was kind of like an outcast, just very private. So she tried to include him in the group. She didn't want to leave him out.
As detectives look closer at the quiet coworker, the information they uncover is concerning.
Started picking up little details about him at that point. There were some people who said, yeah, good guy, he was okay to work with. But there were enough people who pointed out that he was a little weird and had made some overtures to Norma, enough to make us want to look into this a little further.
But did Warren's workplace crush make him a killer?
The nature of the relationship was of interest to us. We're going to have a conversation with Warren Mackey.
Police investigating the murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez are questioning her former coworker, Warren Mackey. Detectives have learned that Warren may have been more than a doting colleague. They're trying to determine if he's connected to this brutal crime.
In our first encounter with Warren Mackey, there was nothing that seemed overtly suspicious or evasive or anything about him.
Detectives ask Warren about his feelings for Norma.
The impression that Warren Mackey gave us was that, his relationship with Norma Rodriguez was pretty casual. They didn't see quite as much of each other because they were no longer working with each other, but they socialized a lot.
Warren said that they were close, but it was only a close friendship. He never had romantic feelings for Norma.
He had tried to present himself to Norma as someone to lean on, someone to talk to. I'm here for you.
But investigators aren't fully buying it.
We felt that Warren liked Norma and that he wanted to make the relationship closer than it already was.
Then, Warren reveals a detail that grabs investigators' attention.
He had helped out Norma with, a couple little things around the house. And one of the things that he mentioned was that the kids had a small basketball hoop and it had somehow gotten broken and that he had fixed it. And what really kind of set off an alarm was the fact that he had fixed it with duct tape.
This is the first time in the investigation that anybody's mentioned duct tape or someone possessing duct tape.
Detectives drilled down on when Warren last saw Norma.
Warren said that he had been in the presence of Norma at the barbecue the day before the homicide. By the time things had wrapped up for the evening, it was essentially just him and Norma there, and they had just kicked back and watched TV for a while. This made him one of the last people who could have or would have seen Norma alive.
Had the former coworker made advances on Norma, then attacked her when she turned him down? Detectives ask where Warren was on the night of the murder.
Warren said that on May the 31st, close to Norma's homicide, he and his roommate and his roommate's girlfriend, they went to a nightclub in Santa Barbara till about 1:30, and then they came back to where they were living at in Oxnard. They talked for a short while, and then everybody went to bed. We drove to Oxnard, and we ended up talking with his roommate and her girlfriend who had gone with him for the night, and they corroborated his story as far as them going to Santa Barbara, closing the nightclub, and then getting back probably between 1:30 and 2 in the morning.
Could Warren have had time to drive to Port Hueneme and kill Norma after arriving home from a late night out with friends? Warren agrees to take a polygraph.
And he passed it, stating that he knew nothing about the homicide and he knew no one who would have killed her.
With nothing concrete tying him to the crime, police let Warren go. But before he leaves, Warren remembers Norma had problems with a man she was dating almost a year ago, named Daniel Garcia.
As the investigation continued, we started interviewing a number of people about Daniel. We found out that Daniel Garcia was Norma's boyfriend for a short period of time.
They met at a party. Norma had a strong attraction to the charming mechanic.
It was a brief but intense relationship, lasted a few months.
She told me about Daniel, that she really cared about him a lot. You know, they would do fun things together, and she always had a good time with him.
Friends tell police Daniel ended the relationship, blindsiding Norma.
Daniel had approached Norma and essentially told her that he wanted to go back with a former girlfriend. But Norma was affected quite a bit by the breakup.
Then, detectives learned that the relationship was turbulent.
There was some fraying in the relationship, and there were some conflicts. Now, that sends up some big red flags. There was one coworker who mentioned that they had witnessed a fairly heated argument between Norma and Daniel.
Daniel came in while she was working. For whatever reason it started, they had a verbal altercation that were witnessed by other people. It shows there was hostile feelings on the part of Daniel Garcia.
When detectives dig deeper into Daniel and Norma's relationship, they learn he visited Norma at home about 2 weeks before her murder.
Norma confided to her close friend she was involved with him before her death.
With a history of conflict in the relationship, did an argument turn deadly?
This is big. Any big fight that went on, that was problematic.
Detectives are closing in on their new suspect.
This could be our guy. We have to find out if he could have committed this crime.
The investigation into the murder of single mother Norma Rodriguez is heating up. Police have a new suspect in their sights, an ex-boyfriend, Daniel Garcia.
One of the things that we learned about the relationship between Daniel and Norma was that there were some conflicts. That sends up some red flags.
Daniel agrees to come to the police station for questioning.
Norma really had no confrontations. She was very mild-mannered. The fact that she was getting into verbal altercations was unusual.
When detectives ask Daniel about his relationship with Norma, he denies any problems.
Daniel said that he wanted to go back with a former girlfriend. And so they broke up and went their separate ways. But they were still able to be somewhat friends, and he would stop by on occasion.
Detectives confront him about the heated argument with Norma at her workplace almost a year earlier.
At the time, Norma learned that he had had other relationships, and it was a problem. She was pretty upset by that.
She still had feelings for Daniel.
Had Norma attempted to restart their relationship, but instead wound up in a fight that spiraled out of control.
During his interview, Daniel told us that he saw Norma but didn't have an argument.
Detectives asked Daniel where he was the night Norma was killed.
He stated that he was at home with other family members watching TV, and then he went to bed. We talked with other family members, and that alibi was corroborated. But family members will lie for other family members. Sometimes they won't be perfectly honest with what they know, and it's extremely difficult to put weight on that.
Like previous suspects, Daniel is subjected to a polygraph.
And he passed.
With no evidence connecting the ex-lover to the crime, police let him go. It's another disappointing dead end.
After a couple of weeks of going through this, talking to countless potential witnesses, countless potential suspects, neighborhood canvasses, interviews with co-workers, polygraph examinations, it was frustrating as hell.
That was really, really hard on my family. We did not have an answer to who killed Norma. I just wanted not only justice for Norma, I was very concerned for any woman out there. We didn't know who it was. It could be someone that just passed me by. I didn't know. I just wanted him off the streets.
1 month into the investigation, the pressure continues to mount on police to solve the case.
We would get calls from the media every day. Every place we went in the community, they would ask us what was going on, and it was a lot of pressure.
Then, a surprising development. Norma's family contacts police with new information about Beatrice, Norma's coworker and friend.
It turns out that Beatrice was having an affair, and she was using Norma's house as a location for these sexual liaisons. Norma knew about it and in fact condoned it and gave her a copy of her house key.
But why hadn't Beatrice disclosed this detail to police earlier?
We confronted Beatrice with this information. Initially, huge wave of embarrassment. But she laid it out on the line. She told us, you know, the when, the how many times.
Detectives question whether the secret rendezvous led to Norma's murder.
Now we've got other people who had, you know, either continued access to the house. Previously, they were on the periphery of this case. Now they've moved right to the center of it.
One person detectives immediately turned to is Beatrice's husband, who also knew Norma. Had he gone after Norma for helping his wife have a secret affair?
And now, suddenly, Beatrice's husband, he's potentially in the suspect pool. We have to find out if he has an alibi and if we can corroborate it.
He apparently didn't know his wife was having an extramarital affair in Norma's house.
That was not the most comfortable thing to do from an investigative standpoint, but it still had to be done. And, you know, the guy was crushed. He was absolutely crushed.
Detectives questioned Beatrice's husband about his whereabouts on the night of Norma's murder.
He told us that he had been at work late that evening. We talked to a lot of his coworkers. Everything about this man was genuine.
6 months into the investigation of the murder of Norma Rodriguez, detectives worry the trail has gone cold.
We're no closer to narrowing it down than we were on day one.
This case was very mind-boggling. You build up things that, wow, this is going to be great, it's coming together, and then it falls apart. As time progressed, the lead started falling off. It was tough. It was really tough.
Months turn to years. For nearly a decade, the case is at a standstill. But Norma's family doesn't give up.
Every year, we'll call the police department for any updates, any new leads or anything. We kept it active. We didn't want this case forgotten.
During this entire investigation, I had the picture of Norma Rodriguez on my desk. I swore to her that I would never give up trying to find out who was responsible.
Then, 10 years to the day Norma was killed. An astonishing break in the case.
Worker with a crime lab. He had a lot of the evidence that we secured in the Norma homicide. He called me and he says, we have a match. We have a match on the DNA.
My head just like exploded with 1,000 thoughts. It was just nuts.
I remember receiving the phone call and it was like winning the lottery.
It's been 10 years since 32-year-old Norma Rodriguez was found in her home, strangled and wrapped in duct tape. The case has remained unsolved, with all leads turning out to be dead ends, until now. With advancements in DNA technology, evidence collected a decade ago has finally yielded results.
At the time of the autopsy of Norma Rodriguez, there were a number of samples that were taken. Hair samples, blood samples, and fingernail clippings.
The crime lab said we have a match on the DNA, and it comes back to Warren Mackey.
Warren, Norma's friend and former coworker who had previously passed a polygraph and had an alibi for the night of the murder. At the time of the investigation, Warren had submitted his DNA and was cooperative.
Of everyone we dealt with, he was maybe the coolest customer of the bunch. It just blows you away.
Investigators start putting the pieces together about Warren Mackey.
If you're dealing with someone who's a true sociopath, they can get past the polygraph test. So now I'm thinking, all this time, were we dealing with a true sociopath and, couldn't see it?
We just went into high gear. We started unraveling everything again and doing what we needed to do.
Detectives start building a case based on forensics.
They evaluated DNA that we had gotten off of Norma's body, and we found Warren's DNA under Norma's fingernails.
The DNA evidence is a major breakthrough, but to build an airtight case, they want more.
The single biggest piece of physical evidence we had at the time was the duct tape. So it got sent off and it got tested.
The DNA that was obtained within the multiple layers of the duct tape was returned to Warren Mackey.
The odds of the DNA match being from someone else besides Warren Mackey was 1 in 810 billion. So we felt pretty confident that this was our person.
Investigators pieced together the events that led up to Norma's murder.
I think this was the classic case of a jilted suitor. And my guess is that he just got a flat-out rejection. He built up his expectations to a point where he couldn't take the fall.
Investigators believe in the early hours of May 31st, Warren Mackey entered Norma's home using keys he had stolen from her purse at the barbecue the day before.
According to Norma's son, Andrew, the house was dark. Many times she would fall asleep watching TV. Maybe she fell asleep on the couch. She had no idea what was about to happen.
Detectives believe that's when Warren strangled Norma.
In his mind, she needed to die because she shouldn't have rejected him.
Then Warren wrapped her head in duct tape.
Trying to depersonalize the scene and covered her face so that he wouldn't see it.
And he ripped that duct tape, handling both ends of the duct tape, wrapped it completely around her face, and left.
Police also believe Norma's 4-year-old son, Austin, was in the next room, not realizing his mother had been murdered.
Austin didn't process, because he was a very small child, that he was too young to process what had happened. An absolute nightmare.
After Warren kills Norma, he returns to his place in nearby Oxnard, as if nothing happened.
I believe that Warren Mackey was the type of person who felt that if I can't have her, nobody can. I think this was one sick individual who had no value for life. He had no right to do what he did.
On August 28, 2003, Ventura County investigators arrest Warren Mackey for the first-degree murder of Norma Rodriguez. Warren pleads not guilty.
During the subsequent 10 years, Warren had settled down. He had gotten married, had a job, was living a very stable life. His friends, neighbors said that he was a nice, caring man.
And for him to live 10 years after that and not even have any remorse, that is not human. I can't imagine what is in a person's head to even hurt another human in that way.
Then, on January 10, 2005, as investigators prepare for trial, the DA receives an unexpected call. Warren Mackey has changed his plea to guilty.
Warren Mackey is an unexpected killer because people didn't see that inner demon, that selfishness, that narcissistic quality that would cause him to end someone else's life. People just didn't see him that way, but he was that way, and he is that way.
On March 28, 2005, Warren Mackey is sentenced to 15 years to life for the murder of Norma Rodriguez.
Oh, it was phenomenal. It was such an elation. You felt like this weight being lifted.
At the end of the day, we achieved closure for the family, but there's never going to be complete closure.
The devastating loss of the vibrant single mother will forever be felt by her loved ones.
I think about Norma a lot. She was having a good life. And he took it away from her.
It still hurts like it happened yesterday. I miss her in my life. That wound does not heal. We just put it in the back burner. We have to live for Norma, and we have to go forward.
On December 16th, 2000, when Jerry Michael Williams, known to everyone as Mike, gears up for an early morning duck hunting trip, downs the last of his morning coffee, and heads out the door of his Tallahassee home.
He was always happiest outdoors. Michael was a hunter from the time he was 6 years old. He would be out with his little bow and arrow shooting at targets.
Mike's destination is Lake Seminole, Florida, a favorite spot where he has fished and hunted for 16 years. It's about 60 miles and a time zone away from Tallahassee. On his way, Mike stops off at work to pick up his shotgun. Though he is only 31, Mike Williams is already a successful commercial real estate appraiser in Tallahassee, and business is booming. His employer, Clay Ketchum, thinks highly of him.
He was really at a point in his career where he was really coming into his own. One thing Mike Williams loved was work. He really enjoyed it, really genuinely did, and he was a great worker for us. He had grown to where he was my primary real estate appraiser. There was almost nothing that he couldn't do.
Mike and his wife Denise are the parents of an 18-month-old girl. Everyone who knows Mike admires his devotion to Ansley, who is the apple of his eye.
He was thrilled to have the baby. That Ansley was the love of his life. In spite of his workload, Mike was always there for Ansley. Whatever Ansley needed, Mike was there. If he had to go home and cook supper for Ansley and then come back to work, he would do it.
Mike took on a lion's share of the responsibility in caring for his child.
He typically worked 12, 14, 16-hour days, got 3, 4, 5 hours sleep where he could, take the baby to the office with him. Working and taking care of the baby was his life from that day when they had her.
On this day, Mike leaves his wife and little girl at home for a solo hunting trip. Dawn has broken by the time Mike pulls up to a dirt landing on the lake. It is chilly in the early morning silence. There is no one else around on the shore or on the water as he launches his motorboat, stows his rifle, and starts the engine.
Mike really enjoyed hunting alone. According to his mother, this was a way of obtaining solitude.
The craft moves across the water and weaves around the many tree stumps that clutter this part of the lake, which was formed by a dam in the 1950s. But Mike knows its contours like the back of his hand. Perhaps he has some luck this morning and brings down his prey. Perhaps not. No one will ever know. December 16th, 2000 is the day Mike Williams disappears. When Mike doesn't return home by noon, his wife Denise is fretful. It is their 6th wedding anniversary, and they have plans to go on an overnight trip to celebrate.
Sometime around noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Denise became very concerned that Mike had not arrived home. She called her father, Warren Merrill, and to let him know that Mike was not home yet. Mike had favorite places he would go when he would hunt and fish, so Warren basically knew where to go.
Denise's father, Warren Merrill, and a friend of Mike's drive out to Lake Seminole to look for him. They locate his truck and boat trailer at the remote landing in Jackson County.
No boat, no Mike, but there it was. He realized something was wrong. At that point, he contacted the Florida Wildlife Commission.
In Florida, the Florida Wildlife Commission, or FWC, is responsible for trying to find missing hunters. The first officer on the scene arrives about 4 p.m.
I started to call in other officers to come help us search.
Mike's mother, Cheryl, is out for a walk when the news comes to her eldest son, Nick, that Mike is missing.
When I got back home, Nick was crying. And he said, "Mama, they can't find Mike." I said, "What do you mean they can't find Mike?" Mama, he didn't come home at noon, and Warren went over there, and they can't find Mike.
On Lake Seminole, a full-scale search continues on and off into the night, interrupted by a severe storm, which brings with it freezing temperatures. Early in the morning of December 17th, Mike's best friend Brian Winchester and his father find Mike's boat along the lake's western shore, just 75 yards from the landing. When it is light, FWC agent Dave Arnett goes out with Brian to look at the boat and do an inventory of the contents.
I found 2 life jackets laying under a bag of decoys in the front of the boat, and a shotgun still in a zippered case along the edge of the driver's seat.
The boat has a Go Devil type motor, useful in shallow, weedy lakes. He checks out the gas tank.
I took the top off of the gas tank, and when I did, I immediately saw that it was absolutely full of gas, that it had not ran very long. So my feeling was that he had fell out of the boat near the landing.
Responders search the area. The water is only 3 to 5 feet deep here and is choked with vegetation, but there is no sign of Mike.
If Michael had fallen out there, you would have found his body.
The location of the boat is also surprising, given the heavy western winds of the storm the night before. The boat should have been blown to the eastern shore, not washed up on the west bank. After the first day passes with no sign of Mike, it is assumed that Williams is the victim of a tragic accident.
I felt very sad. We really felt like that Mike had drowned and that he would be found probably within a week or so.
Over the coming weeks, officers spend 735 man-hours over an unprecedented 56 days scouring a 10-acre patch of Lake Seminole for Mike Williams.
Many law enforcement agencies were involved in this initial search, but the initial search was for a missing person. It was for somebody who may have had an accident on the lake. This particular lake, it's not that infrequent to have a drowning victim.
We expected, to recover the body quite soon. We just had problems understanding why we weren't able to locate the subject.
As time goes on, the search party questions why Mike's body doesn't float to the surface.
Historically speaking, most people that do go missing in Lake Seminole eventually will surface and a body will be found. I believe that there is some data that says that Jerry Michael Williams was the only body that was never found out of Lake Seminole.
There were theories floating around that maybe he wasn't here, but we continued with our search as if he was here because we had no other indication that he would not be here. His vessel was here. He was a duck hunter on this lake.
There was just no trace of Mike. It was like he disappeared into thin air.
Soon, a troubling theory develops. People start saying that Mike must have pitched overboard, and the chest-high waders he wore for duck hunting had sucked him 8 feet to the bottom. The alligators that infest the lake, some up to 10 feet long, must have gotten to him before the searchers could.
Their evidence investigator said, "Miss Williams, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but your son fell out of his boat and bumped his head and drowned, and alligators ate him."
It is not an explanation Mike's mother can accept. Coming up, suspicions grow that the disappearance of Mike Williams is no accident.
So what are my other alternatives if he didn't get eaten by alligators? Did he walk off? Did somebody hurt him?
The intensive hunt at Lake Seminole, Florida for missing Tallahassee businessman Mike Williams continues through the Christmas holidays of 2000 into 2001.
When they were doing the search, they'd taken these big PVC poles and they were standing in boats and they were literally going down like every 6 inches, poking, trying to find a body, something.
By February, 2 months after he disappeared, there is still no sign of Mike Williams. But the theory that he may have been eaten by alligators gains traction.
This was no doubt the most exhaustive search in this lake. Since the lake it has been in existence since 1957. So there had been theories that started as far as what may have happened to Mike, why did he disappear? One of the earliest thoughts was that Mike may have been attacked and eaten by alligators.
There was this idea that was put forward that people believed. Mike Williams, the man eaten by alligators.
Mike's boss, Clay Ketchum, hears the theory that Mike might have been eaten by alligators from Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester.
And he said, I hate to even mention this to you, but there has been the thought process that an alligator has got him. And I just said, oh my gosh, and just felt sort of an uneasy, sick feeling in my stomach. That's the first time I had heard of the alligator eating theory.
Cheryl Williams, Mike's mother, refuses to believe such a terrible thing could have happened to her son. And Mike had always told her that alligators don't feed when it's cold.
I said, but that's not possible. Alligators don't eat in cold water. So then I called Florida State University and talked to their top alligator expert, and he said, no, your son could not have been eaten by alligators. Physiologically impossible. While it's a good theory, it won't hold up in your son's disappearance.
The evening Mike disappeared, a cold front moved through the area, and the weather for the next couple of weeks was freezing.
It got down to 19 degrees. It was very, very cold. They had like big 55-gallon drums that they would keep alit to warm the searchers. There's certainly no alligators moving in that kind of weather.
I've lived in Jackson County most of my adult life. In my experiences as a child playing in Lake Seminole, seeing alligators, I don't have any personal knowledge of anyone ever being attacked or eaten by an alligator in Jackson County.
Throughout the long vigil, friends and relatives all pitch in to help.
At the lake were Mike's closest buddies, I would guess. Mike's father-in-law, Mr. Merrill, was there. Brian Winchester was there, and his father, and I would kind of surmise that Mr. Winchester and his son Brian were sort of the lead dogs in this. Mike's very best friend was Brian Winchester. They often traveled together to hunt ducks in Louisiana, Texas. So they were just very, very close.
Mike's brother Nick is also a constant presence at the scene, poking the lake bottom, looking for any sign of Mike. As kids, they had been close, but in recent years have grown apart. Nick finds himself filled with regrets. At first, he believes Mike is drowned, but he becomes increasingly suspicious about what has happened to his little brother.
We'd pull up sticks and fishing reels, all kinds of debris, pieces of boats, just anything you can think of. It might have fallen in a lake, but never found any trace of Mike or any of Mike's belongings.
Then, 10 days after Mike's disappearance, an FWC officer sees a hat floating in some weeds at the lake's edge.
Officer Perry and myself were searching, doing a grid pattern across the stumpy area, and we noticed a camouflage hat floating off to the east weed line of the search area. We collected the hat, which was a camouflage duck hunter's hat.
To the FWC officers, something seems odd about the find. The hat hadn't been there when they previously searched the area.
9 days prior to that, the hat was not there. There was nothing that we had found in an extensive search across the area. And on the 10th morning of the search, we found the hat floating there. The hat was like new. It had no slimy residue on it that things in Lake Seminole normally has. It appeared to have been recently bought or a new hat.
And Brian, Mike's friend, says, well, it looks like a hat that Michael had. But everybody at the search site knew that the hat had not been there for 2 weeks.
They tested it for DNA. It came back that Mike's head was not in this hat. They could not find any traces of DNA in there.
Mike's family can't help but wonder if the hat was placed there intentionally. They just don't know who would have done so or why. In February, Mike's wife Denise decides to hold a memorial service for her husband.
Denise's father came to me and Nick, and he said, Denise needs to get on with her life. We need to have a memorial service. And I said, but we don't know that Mike's dead. He's in the lake. I told you he's in the lake. And Nick said, but we don't know that he's dead. But if she wants to have it, okay.
The memorial takes place on February 11th, the day after the search officially ends.
I thought Denise was brokenhearted. Anytime I was around her, she wasn't talking very much. She seemed really sad. She wasn't having very much to do with the baby. She was sleeping a lot.
For the authorities, the Mike Williams case is closed. FWC's accident report ends simply with the notation that the duck hunter remains missing. According to Cheryl, about a week after the memorial, Mike's friend Brian Winchester meets with an attorney to ask about the requirements to have someone declared dead without a body or death certificate. And while Denise Williams seems to want to put the tragedy behind her, her mother-in-law is not able to let the matter rest without proof her son is dead.
So what are my other alternatives if he didn't drown in the lake and he didn't get eaten by alligators? Did he walk off? That was not something I wanted to think either, because he loved that child so much, and he loved Denise.
She tries to convince the authorities to investigate her son's disappearance as a criminal case. But she is unsuccessful. Still, she finds it hard to believe that Mike is dead and holds on to the hope he is alive somewhere. But if her beloved son is dead, Cheryl is certain that Mike didn't meet with an accidental death hunting on Lake Seminole. She believes his disappearance is due to foul play.
I couldn't think of anybody that would want to hurt my son. So what I did was I started listening. And I started writing down everything that everybody said. And all these different things just didn't add up.
Coming up, Mike's mother finally gets a criminal investigation going. But is it too little, too late?
Absent Mike's body, absent any trace of him, without any kind of physical evidence at all, it is incredibly difficult to crack this case.
Leaves a hole in his mother Cheryl's heart. Her husband Jerry has recently died after a short illness. Now she has also lost her youngest son. Mike had risen to affluence, making $250,000 a year as a real estate appraiser. But he had begun his life in modest circumstances. His father was a Greyhound bus driver, and his mother has always made ends meet by taking care of other people's children along with her own. Mike and his brother Nick grew up in a double-wide trailer surrounded by woods in the countryside. A deeply religious woman, Cheryl scrimped and saved to send her sons to a private Christian school in Tallahassee.
That's where he met a lot of people that I would say are from a higher socioeconomic background. Lawyers and professional engineers, those types of things. I think that was part of why Mike was driven so much to earn money, but also to be respected and earn the respect of his peers.
Mike was popular and on the football team. In the 9th grade, he met Denise Merrill, a new student. They fell in love.
She told me, she said, Miss Williams, I saw Mike on the first day, and I knew he was it. I loved her. I thought she was wonderful for Mike. Her family was one of the best families in Tallahassee, and she was beautiful. I was proud of her.
At school, Mike also met Denise's childhood friend, Brian Winchester, and all three often hung around together. They were all friends until the day Mike Williams disappeared. Mike was president of the senior class, and Denise was voted best dressed. After they graduated from college, Mike and Denise got married. But after the wedding, Mike's mother and brother Nick say, they didn't see Denise very much.
When he got married, he didn't talk too much about the marriage, about what was going on in his life. Mom, Dad, and me didn't get invited over too much. They pretty much kept to themselves.
When Mike brought his daughter to visit, he usually came alone.
I always had the feeling that Denise just really didn't like any of us that much. Kind of looked down on us. Denise just went out of her way not to visit that much, even when Mike was there.
Still, Mike's family never thought there was anything wrong in the marriage. The official search for Mike Williams ends in February 2001. Then in June, 6 months after he disappeared, a new piece of evidence floats to the surface of Lake Seminole and raises questions. A fisherman on the lake finds a pair of waders drifting in a spot he has fished many times since Mike disappeared. He calls the Fish and Game Service to come and examine them.
The waders were not slimy. After 6 months, they should have been slimy. They were clean waders. They were like new.
They were completely pristine. There were no alligator teeth marks. Now, they had always told family and friends that when we find the waders, we will find Mike. Mike will be in them. Well, when that happened, people who heard about that, the mystery really intensified.
The waders are shown to Mike's friend, Brian Winchester. He can't make a positive identification, but says they look like waders Mike used.
Forensic checks were done on the waders, and there was no way to actually link these waders to Mike.
They determined that there was no genetic material inside the waders, and they actually gave the waders to the father-in-law. After they found the waders, the family or friend of the victim contacted a pretty renowned local diver.
The diver goes into the water where the waders were found, and minutes later he surfaces with a jacket and a flashlight. Both appear to be in pristine condition, not slimy as they should be if they had been sitting on the bottom of the lake for 6 months. In the pocket is a hunting license with Mike Williams' name on it.
You could read his driver's license number, his address, and you could even still see his signature. I mean, just as plain as if he had read it yesterday. And the light was a little cheap light, probably not waterproof, and probably not waterproof for 6 months. But they recovered it, clicked it on, and it was still operational.
Despite the suspicious condition of these new pieces of evidence, there is still no criminal investigation into Mike's disappearance, and no public scrutiny. Not long after the items are found, Cheryl Williams discovers that her daughter-in-law, Denise, has applied to a probate court in Florida to have Mike declared legally dead.
Florida law indicates that somebody must be missing for a period of 7 years before they are declared dead. However, that can be changed if there are circumstances which come up which may prove that somebody may have perished of an accident, homicide, or whatever. Then that can be changed and brought up before the court.
Though Mike Williams has been missing for just 6 months, little more than a week after the waders, jacket, and license are found in Lake Seminole, his widow submits their discovery as evidence to the circuit court in Tallahassee. The judge grants a presumptive certificate of death. Shortly afterwards, Denise Williams collects the proceeds of Mike's life insurance, at least $1.5 million.
You were not told one thing about anything.
These items were used and mentioned in the probate hearing to get Mike declared dead, prominently saying, here these waders were found, here this jacket was found. And a hearing that Cheryl Williams was never made aware of, that happened very quietly and very quickly.
Cheryl Williams is devastated by the news that Mike is declared dead. She is more convinced than ever that there is something shady going on. And she has new suspicions about why Denise was so eager to have a memorial service so soon after Mike disappeared.
One thing we did learn was that in order to declare somebody dead, you have to hold a public service saying that they're dead.
Her efforts to initiate an investigation don't sit well with Denise Williams. According to Cheryl and Nick Williams, Denise threatens her mother-in-law that if she persists, she will be sorry.
She and her daddy told us, if you do anything to get a criminal investigation, you're going to lose Ansley. I mean, it wasn't just a veiled threat. It was a statement. You'll lose Ansley. She said, I've got to go on with my life. I don't want to be bothered with anything else. I don't ever want to hear Mike's name again, and I don't want to know anything that has to do with him.
But the threat of losing contact with her granddaughter only intensifies Cheryl's search for the truth.
People have said, you had a granddaughter, you should have let it go because it can't do anything but hurt her. But I also had a son, and I didn't have anybody looking for him but me.
It takes 3.5 years, but finally in 2004, a family friend helps Cheryl get her suspicions before an investigator at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. An investigation is finally launched into the disappearance of Mike Williams. Several different law enforcement agencies look into the case, and in the end, they all agree.
Is it more than likely Mike did not disappear at the lake, that something happened to Mike maybe before he went to the lake?
The investigators face overwhelming challenges. At no time in the 56-day search for Mike Williams was his disappearance investigated as a possible crime.
Nothing was handled in the way that investigators normally would handle, let's say, a crime scene.
His home was never searched. Neither were his boat and trailer, which were driven off and left at Brian Winchester's father's home for months. The searchers trampled all over the places where his boat and truck were found, obliterating any possible evidence. The items taken from the lake were not preserved.
There's this laxness about it, which I think is born of not really a conspiracy in any way, of just people making assumptions that what they had was a boating accident, never even imagining for a second that they could have an actual crime, that there could be foul play involved. And I think from the outset, that has hindered this investigation, because without some sort of physical evidence, absent Mike's body, absent any trace of him, it is incredibly difficult to crack this case.
Coming up, a reporter shines new light on the case.
Almost every person that I talked to said they thought it was strange from the very beginning and listed.
After an official investigation begins into Mike Williams' disappearance, authorities are soon convinced that it is a suspicious missing persons case. Lake Seminole is in Jackson County, Florida, and Derek Wester, an investigator with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, is pulled into the case in 2004.
If you were ever an investigator, then you know what I'm talking about. Or if you've ever investigated a mystery, you pick up this case and you read it. After second page, you're hooked. You're like, oh, I can solve this. I can solve this.
Wester left law enforcement in 2010, but he worked on the Mike Williams case longer than any other investigator, and he still feels a responsibility to Mike's mother, Cheryl.
You feel that hurt and that loss that she's got. I think that Ms. Williams deserves to know. I told her I'd do whatever I could.
He shares an opinion about the case with other law enforcement.
I think that he was the victim of foul play.
Wester believes the timing of the discovery of the waders and other evidence in Lake Seminole, so close to the hearing to determine Mike dead, is suspiciously convenient.
It was either God sent or man sent, would be my best. Either somebody put it there or God put it there, because it hadn't been there for the last 6 months.
When he begins his investigation in 2004, Wester learns the Florida Division of Insurance had conducted a quiet investigation of its own back in 2001. The agency thought it was curious that Mike's widow, Denise, had filed a claim on one of his life insurance policies just 20 days after he went missing, while the search for him was still going on.
Mike had 3 very large insurance policies, and before the actual search was ended in February of 2001, his spouse, Denise, went ahead and started to explore the possibilities of obtaining some insurance monies. At some point, the Florida Department of Insurance actually got involved and started to check on the timing of the insurance policies.
Mike's boss, Clay Ketchum, knew about one of the insurance policies because Mike had asked his advice about buying it just 6 months before he disappeared.
Should he get $1 million worth of coverage, or should he get a lesser amount? And I said, well, get all the life insurance you can.
Clay also knew that Mike had been having some trouble in his marriage.
Probably 30 days prior to his disappearance, he shared with me some issues that he was having at home. For Mike, he was very vocal about it in terms of he wasn't happy with the way things were.
But Clay didn't tell the first insurance investigator who questioned him about the marital problems, feeling it would violate his friend's confidence. Though he had reason to wonder why Denise was so in need of money, since he was still paying her Mike's residual income.
Denise continued to receive checks. And so I felt like there was enough, cash flow there and I certainly disclosed to Denise how much money would be coming in. And it was probably a year and a half after Mike's disappearance before the checks finally stopped.
So there didn't seem to be a desperate need for the money.
In 2004, there is a new development. Denise is now openly dating Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester, who has gotten divorced from his wife.
It was probably just a few years after Mike disappeared that Denise came out and told us that she and Brian were dating.
That same year, the FDLE launches a criminal investigation together with Derek Wester from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office.
You had to have motive for a crime, and there's only 2 people that benefited from Mike Williams' death, and that was a pretty substantial amount of money. So, to me, there's always been 2 persons of interest.
During the course of the investigation, Wester interviews Brian Winchester.
And we got a call shortly thereafter that he had retained an attorney and he didn't want to speak with us anymore. And then the same attorney also advised us that the widow, Miss Williams, didn't want to be a part of it. They wanted to put it behind them.
Shortly afterward, in 2005, Brian and Denise marry. They continue to live in the home Mike had bought in an upscale suburb of Tallahassee. Meanwhile, Cheryl continues to do everything she can to call attention to her son's suspicious disappearance. Jennifer Portman, a senior reporter for the Tallahassee Democrat, never even hears about the Mike Williams case until 2006, when she sees an ad in her paper placed by Cheryl. It immediately catches her attention.
That says, "Have you seen my son?" And it was a large ad. Like, this is interesting. I proceed to read. It says, "My name is Cheryl Ann Williams. My son has been missing since December 16th, 2000. They said first he was eaten by alligators. Now they think he was the victim of foul play." I mean, it was this very compelling, long thing. And I'm like, alligators, missing guy, investigation. And the second I saw that, I'm like, this is a story that we need to follow up on. It was a compelling mystery.
She pokes her nose into the case, digging up court records, talking to almost everyone who was ever involved in investigating his disappearance. Though there was never much media coverage of the case, she learns that to many in Tallahassee, a small city and gossipy state capital, the case is something of a legend.
Almost every person that I talked to 6 years later said they thought it was strange from the very beginning and listed reasons why.
Her articles bring in new leads, and it is clear from her interviews with law enforcement that the focus on what happened to Mike has shifted. By 2006, investigators doubt Mike was ever at the lake that December day 6 years before. They think the entire scene appears set up to deceive law enforcement and members of his family about what really happened to him.
They're convinced now that he never made it to the lake and that he was murdered, most possibly just in his own house. And then the events were all staged to make it look like a hunting accident. That's leading law enforcement opinions.
And the mystery is, if Mike never left his house to go hunting, how did those items get out there?
Take 2 people. One drives that truck, one drives another truck. He pulls up, unhooks it, pushes it out. It wouldn't be hard at all to stage this.
There are people who know what happened to Mike, or at least know a lot more about what happened that night or that morning, that have never come forward.
Coming up, could new revelations lead to Mike Williams' killers?
They have new evidence that they're going over, and I hope that it's something that they can use to charge and convict somebody.
There is a new twist in the Mike Williams disappearance case. Authorities have already learned that the $1 million life insurance policy Mike bought 6 months before he disappeared was sold to him by Brian Winchester, now the husband of Denise Williams, Mike's widow. Now, the Florida State Division of Insurance Fraud announces it will take a fresh look at the case.
It's hard to overlook that his widow did marry the best friend who was instrumental in 2 of those insurance policies, and we don't overlook that.
While Denise had disclosed those policies in her petition to have Mike declared dead, she hadn't mentioned another.
We know that there was at least one more insurance policy, a pretty substantial amount of money too, that she failed to disclose. And we also had the proof that she knew that that policy existed. Between the disappearance of Mike and the petition, she wrote a check out to the insurance agents for the premium.
Wester thought the insurance investigators had a pretty good case. But then, late in 2008, the fraud investigation is closed, citing a lack of sufficient evidence that insurance fraud had occurred.
I thought we was going to be able to make an arrest, but for some reason, nobody ever got arrested. I don't know why the warrant was never applied for or issued.
Over the years, Derek Wester has worked with an ever-changing cast of investigators on the Mike Williams case from a number of agencies. So many, he finds it puzzling.
It's odd. FDLE reassigned the case to, I don't know, 4 or 5 different agents that I know of. And then they get pulled off the case and somebody else gets reassigned.
Mike Devaney is the latest FDLE officer to tackle the Williams case. He says the agency has never dropped the ball on the investigation.
There has not been a year since 2000 where there hasn't been something investigatively going on with this case. We have a tremendous amount of information, and we are re-examining.
I really think that FDLE is on the right track now. They've got new angles, and I honestly believe that they're really working on it now.
Derek Wester stopped actively working on the case in 2008, but he says he keeps an eye and ear on it even now.
They have some new information. They have new evidence that they're going over, and I hope that it's something that they can use to charge and convict somebody.
The FDLE says they have persons of interest, but won't officially identify them. Neither Denise nor Brian Winchester has been named as a suspect or charged with any crime. Nevertheless, some people are curious about Mike's widow and former best friend.
I don't know if they did it or not, and I just don't have any reason to suspect that they did. I just have this incomplete loop in my life where, and all of us do that loved Mike, that we don't know what happened.
It seems that if anyone should be questioning what happened to Mike, you think it would be his wife and his best friend. I mean, the facts are there for them as they are for everyone else, and they won't really comment on this.
In an email, Brian Winchester declined our interview request to him and his wife, Denise. In spite of everything, Cheryl Williams still holds out hope her son is alive.
I've always had 2 choices. Mike's dead or he's alive. Until they can bring me his body or proof of his body, I don't have to believe that he's dead. I can still hold out that hope that he's alive.
She knows she is the only one, but that is her duty as a mom. Until she knows for sure, she is not going to let him go. And I know that as every day passes and every year passes, it's a crushing burden.
And of course, there is another possible explanation for Mike's disappearance. He may have arranged it himself.
The pressure of work, the workaholic nature in him got the best of him, and he just said, I can't stand the pressure anymore.
Some people say that he's this down in Costa Rica or Mexico or somewhere sitting on a beach, drinking drinks with funny little umbrellas.
But those who know him best discount that theory.
My brother was not the kind of man who would just walked up, picked up and left.
Ansley was his pride and joy. That father deeply loved that child. I can't imagine him in a million years leaving that child.
There were investigative steps to try to determine, did Mike do this? And those came up negative. There's no evidence that Mike had a different identity or is living in Rio.
And so that only leaves one other possibility, and that's that somebody hurt him and have done something with him.
Cheryl Williams can't rest until she gets an answer, one way or the other.
I can't even begin to tell you how horrible it is. It's in my head all the time. My youngest child is not here, and I don't know how he died, if he's dead. I don't know where he is, if he's alive. All I've had is people lie to me, tell me, you're crazy, Miss Williams. He got eaten by alligators. Leave him in the bottom of the lake.
As Cheryl Williams cares for children at her home daycare business, she remembers the child she has lost, and that child's child. She hasn't seen her granddaughter Ansley since October of 2004, but she hopes one day to reconnect with Mike's child. Each year on Ansley's birthday, She puts an ad in the paper to tell her she still loves her.
If I had not done what I did for all these years, not one other person in this world would have questioned his disappearance. 80 people have drowned in Lake Seminole. Mike's is the only body that never came up.
Intrepid as ever, Cheryl still pickets in Tallahassee from time to time with a homemade sign to remind people Mike is still missing. She and Nick put up posters, but they are often quickly torn down. Still, many people hold out hope for answers for Cheryl and the community.
I think everyone wants to get Cheryl that closure, even if it is that she finally has to face the fact that Mike is dead. At least that is closure. It is this open-endedness that is just